Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of CoinNewsExtra interview session. It's a program where we invite innovators, enthusiasts, and men who are doing amazingly well in the blockchain, fintech, and emerging tech sector. So today I have with me a great innovator in the ecosystem. I have a personality, Simon Hardie. He is the co-founder, Fintech. So Simon, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great, and nice to meet you also. So, how is the ecosystem over there?
Sorry, how is the?
How is the ecosystem, the blockchain ecosystem?
It's an interesting question. I think blockchain has gone through something of a hype cycle, and I suspect over the next couple of years we're going to see what that really means. I suspect some of the hype is starting to tail off. We're seeing on the index that we have on our global platform of fintech companies, we're starting to see lots of sort of blockchain or blockchain-based companies, which are sort of working across different industries. I was looking this morning. We've got companies listed which doing a very diverse range of things, from trading and investing to authentication and through to enabling marketplaces. I think I just come across a company this morning which is enabling the selling of cars, second-hand cars, using a blockchain ledger system. So I would say it's certainly the hype has sort of died down. And I mean, my guess will be, based on what we know over the next 5 years, we'll start to see, what some of the real models, the real use cases for blockchain-based businesses are, and what that looks like.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. We'll be looking at blockchain integration into the fintech. We want to see how blockchain, there have been this misunderstanding between this ecosystem. So we want to see how a blockchain can be integrated into the fintech, how fintech can leverage this emerging tech. But before we go straight to that particular topic, can you just give us a brief about your background?
Yes, of course, absolutely. So Condexable is a data analytics startup company. We're a UK firm, started about a year ago. We're building, we've built an algorithm which ranks and scores fintech cities and fintech countries, fintech ecosystems globally, basically by looking at the population density and some other metrics, but looking primarily at the population density of fintech firms in every location around the world. It's a real-time index, which basically means that a fintech firm can find our map, complete a few details, and put their company on the map. And we're using that indexation tool of ecosystems really to ultimately build out a living, breathing indexation of fintech innovation globally, and that's something that we're sort of working on quite hard at the minute. So that into sort of 2021, you'll start to see both more fintech companies from different regions and locations on the map, but you'll also be able to do different things with that listing. You'll be able to see more information about the individual companies. You'll be able to sort of look at the categorizations, see where the emerging hotspots for different verticals, whether it's in payments or cryptocurrency or blockchain, and you'll be able to start to do some comparisons between markets, between regions, and ultimately, as we build out the platform between the companies themselves.
Interesting. We've seen what is happening in the fintech ecosystem. What are some of the solutions fintech is bringing, and how do you think blockchain technology can play a role in helping bringing those solutions or making those solutions easier to bring?
Yes, thank you for that. It's an interesting question. I think what interests me most about, I'll just sort of come at this from a slightly different angle, but what interested me particularly most when we first launched this index last year was that, fintech innovation, the fintech story really came out of obviously, the Bay Area and San Francisco. It then sort of migrated sort of during the course of the global financial crisis across to Europe, particularly centered around London. It's since then sort of proliferated across to Asia, and Singapore and Hong Kong are both built kind of thriving fintech hubs. But what's really clear from the index as we have it now, and the ranking of ecosystems, is really that story of the kind of traditional financial centers is actually old news, and that fintech is a much more global phenomenon. It's helping both to internationalize. It's also helping to connect regions, no matter where they are. And I think, in terms of the sort of the specific answer to your question, the interesting stuff that's happening is in places like Africa, where the lack of a traditional financial infrastructure is causing entrepreneurs to come up with creative solutions. And then when it comes to blockchain, a big part of that is around, from what we've seen, the blockchain role in all of that is in enabling the building of marketplaces. So the ability for a smallholder, with a very small plot of land, to get access to a wider market by selling their goods and doing that digitally. So we're starting to see these sort of agricultural marketplaces that are cropping up across Africa, also in other regions as well. Markets for energy, pay-as-you-go, pay-per-use energy platforms, which in principle are neither blockchain nor fintech businesses, but actually, because of the local needs of the marketplace, fintech and potentially blockchain forms sort of a core part to enabling that solution and enabling that connectivity between a buyer and a seller of a product or a service. So I think really, whether it's specific to blockchain or specific to fintech, I think increasingly that's really going to become a side issue. I think ultimately it will all come down to what is the solution that's required, what is the problem that needs to be solved, and then what are the component parts of that? What is the technology? What is the financial model? What is the access to the customer?
Interesting. There have been this. It's like blockchain is becoming a buzzword. Everybody is saying blockchain, blockchain. The way it's as if blockchain is going, though it cut across different sectors, but the way people are presenting it, is it that there are no limitations or issues, challenges associated with blockchain technology?
Well, I guess it always seems like that with any new technology that people think is the hype cycle kicks in relatively quickly once a few people get their hands on the kind of ramifications and the potential. If you look back to the dot-com bubble 2001. Everybody said that when the internet, when sort of the impact of the internet was first being felt, there were lots of crazy business models that were being created, businesses that were being launched, and they could raise money because there was so much excitement. A lot of those were proven not to be viable, and I suspect with blockchain that will also be the case. That in principle you're right. There is no limit to the kind of the areas that sort of particular model or breed of technology can be applied to. But what's not happened yet, and there are multiple reasons for that, because it's a sort of potentially a transformative way of managing risk and of managing companies, managing transactions. What we've not really seen yet is what are the kind of core use cases that both solve problems and create value.
Okay, interestingly, let's move back a bit over to fintech and talk briefly about fintech. So, what's the current state of the fintech sector, and how do you think blockchain technology and other emerging tech can help improve the current state of fintech?
Well, I think increasingly, financial services as a whole, not just innovative or financial services or digital or fintech or whatever one calls it. Ultimately, financial services is over the next decade is going to go through a fundamental shift. And arguably, whether one splits, whether one calls blockchain, whether one categorizes blockchain as specifically fintech or not, blockchain and the crypto side of things is going to be brought along with that shift. I don't think it. The problem with traditional financial services has always been the way that it's thought about itself in the silo. It's thought about its own problems, and it's focused on itself as an industry. Fintech has started to move away from that by looking more at where the pain points for individual customers are. Particularly if one thinks around payments, if one thinks around banking and financial services for small business, and for lending for marginal customers, or for customers where data analytics on those customer groups is hard to come by. So that kind of move away from just focusing on the bank as the institution and whether or not they decide to interact with the customer has already started to happen. I think the next wave that we'll start to see, and it will be almost certainly will have been accelerated by the pandemic this year. What we'll start to see is many businesses that are not financial services businesses start to build in a financial component, primarily because increasingly they're going to have to transact online, and as soon as you have to transact remotely and online, and unless obviously you're not dealing with customers directly, the way to enable a transaction, whether it's a financial transaction or a data transaction in the case of a blockchain ledger, it implies a secure and potentially a financial component. So I think fintech is sort of the beginnings of a story which ultimately ends in what I think I would call finance 3.0, which is where every business is potentially a fintech business, because primarily it has to trade remotely, digitally, and if it wants to grow, it certainly has to trade remotely and digitally.
Interesting. Fin 3.0 is every business is going to be or if not a fintech company. So, lastly, before we draw the curtain on today's episode of CoinNewsExtra interview, so Finzel, your organization, is part of the African Fintech Summit, which is by the corner. What do you intend to achieve, and what are the expectations for this nice conference?
Well, thanks for that. So as Fintexable, we're working with Africa Fintech Network, with Senfree, based in South Africa, to build the world's first real-time map of African fintech innovation. So we have currently assembled, I think, what we think is already the largest group of, or the largest catalogue of African fintech companies so far. I think we're numbering just over 400 fintech firms. We have those on our existing Africa map, on our global index, which everybody can look at. And with the Africa Fintech Network, we're really looking to build out that index, both to improve the census of fintech companies across the continent, so that we can see where the emerging hubs and hotspots for fintech innovation are. And we're working with them also just to start to really improve the quality and the quantity of information that's available on African fintech firms. Ultimately, not just to do it because it's an interesting thing to do, but ultimately to ensure that the investment, the venture capital, the investment opportunity of investing in African fintech is visible, and to really try and remove the barrier that comes currently, to remove that barrier between the location of a fintech firm and its likelihood to attract investment, because we know at the moment that's a broken link. So a company in London or Singapore or New York or wherever, or San Francisco is fundamentally, just by nature of its location, going to find it easier to attract investment than than a company in Kampala or Kigali or even Lagos with its recent successes. And we want, with Africa FinTech Network, we're now on a mission really, as I say, to build out that catalogue, to show the breadth of innovation that's happening across financial services and in adjacent marketplaces and connected to blockchain. To really show what innovation is out there and to enable investors that are looking at our map to really look, to be able to really look at Africa and see what the opportunities are, and ideally drive more inward investment into African financial services innovation.
That's very nice. I've been able to do justice to that particular topic. And it's amazing to know what you are doing and what you have for Africa. Thank you very much, Simon Hardie, for joining us today on Coin News Extra
Thank you
interview.
very much for the opportunity. Nice to meet you, and I hope we can speak again in a year's time when we will have moved things on and we'll have more information on the African fintech ecosystem.